Hi everybody, my name is Dave McDermott. I'm alcoholic. My sobriety date is June the 10th, 1977. I was, with the grace of God, I was able to celebrate 48 years this past June 10th. And that's also AA's anniversary with 90 years we started. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the beginning of AA and a little bit about my experience. It was good to hear the baby in the audience. I'm always remembered about my friend Mary up on Long Island. She had a little Timmy. Timmy was a little toddler when she got sober, and she would take Timmy to day meetings, afternoon meetings, night meetings. Timmy made more meetings in the first couple of years of his life than most people in AA do. Then it was time for Timmy to go to kindergarten. And then the second day of kindergarten, Mary gets a telephone call from the teacher saying, you have to come up here, we have a problem with Timmy. And she said, oh, Timmy, are you getting a fight or something in the kindergarten? So she goes up there and the teacher says, the first day we sat everybody down in a circle and to ask their name, and your son said, my name is Timmy and I'm an alcoholic. Timmy's sober 28 years now, but it came true. I'm not an expert on anything. I just a drunk who hasn't picked up a drink and haven't died. What a gift that we have here. I'm reminded of a story about a guy that was known to talk a little bit long at the meeting. So it was a speaker meeting like this, and he started when he was born and went through the whole thing. An hour later, he's just on the third grade. People started getting up and leaving. In the second hour, he's just getting into high school. He'd been drinking, and by close to the fourth hour, most people left. And he just finishes up, and there was one person left. And he goes over to him. He said, I know I went on a little bit long. But thanks for staying. And he said, I had to stay. I'm the second speaker. Do we have another speaker after me? I heard somebody early on in sobriety talk about they're a bozo on a bus, and that's pretty much describes me. But my ego says I'm a bozo on a special bus. My sponsor says I belong on a short bus. Probably with a helmet sometimes, thank God this is not Perfect Synonymous in AA. If it was Perfect Synonymous, I would have been thrown out a long time ago. I'm not going to go into a long drunkalogue. You ever see somebody say that? And then they look at their watch, that's the take, and then an hour later, it's the fourth grade. But I wound up drunk one night, on June 9th, 1977. I was in the bar business in a little town on eastern Long Island, had been for a number of years. And I came out of the blackout. I was in the parking lot of the Lake Ronkonkoma group in Suffolk County, Long Island. And I was crying. I had a crying jag on. That was the other thing I was getting a lot of. Two guys were going down to the basement of the church meeting, and they could have just looked over and said, look at that psycho who's going to the meeting. But they come over to me and they told me later on that I kept saying, I need help. They brought me downstairs. A beginner's meeting was about to start. They got me a half a cup of coffee. I sat down, the crying stopped by that time. And a woman by the name of Pat was leading that meeting, and Pat's still sober and active in AA today. It was a small meeting. They sat in chairs in a circle, and everybody was saying their name and that they were an alcoholic. And when it got to me, I just said, I'm just here to find out what AA's definition of an alcoholic is. Which I'm thinking, ain't one of me. I know what an alcoholic is, and I'm not one of them. And she said, she didn't tell me what AA's definition of an alcoholic was. She simply asked me a question. She said, why are you here? And for the first time in a long time, I got a little honest with myself, and I said, I can't stop drinking, and I really think I'm going crazy. And she says, wow, that's a great definition. Why don't you use that? So for the last 48 years, I've been using that as a definition. They asked me to stay for a second meeting, and they said it was a closed discussion meeting. And I said, well, yes, for alcoholics, I don't know whether I'm an alcoholic or not. And they said, well, you'll do until a real one shows up. And they sat me at a table where they were talking about the first step. And by this time, the crying jag was gone. Now I was getting a little feisty. As people would start to share, I would stop them in the middle of their share and saying, you drink vodka? You a vodka drinker? And they say, yes, I am, and no, I'm not. And they go on sharing about the cat or whatever they were talking about. But I stopped everybody at that table asking that stupid question. They didn't say, shut up. They didn't say, get out of here. They were very, very kind to me. At the end of the meeting, what they did is they passed around a meeting list, meeting directory. A lot of groups do that to get telephone numbers. This is the meeting list that they passed around from June of 1977. I had it in my archives thing. It has one name on it. The guy who put his name on it at my first anniversary come up to me and said, Dave, I have to make amends to you. And I said, what do you mean, amends? He says when they were passing that meeting list around, they were just passing it. Nobody was signing it. And so I wrote out my name and the phone number, but I put the wrong telephone number down. They did not think I was going to be coming back. And I kept saying, how can I stay sober attending bar for a living? And they said, beats the hell out of me. What they did is they introduced me to a couple of guys that were bartenders, bar owners, waiters, waitresses, and they told me the same story. They said, what you do is, pick up the first drink, you go to a meeting, you ask God to keep you sober in the morning, you thank him at night, talk to another alcoholic during the day. And if you continue to do that, there's a shot that you can get through the attended bar and do anything. And I didn't believe in that, So I remember going home that night, telling my wife. My wife was my drinking buddy, and she said, it's good for you. You can go to that AA stuff, and I'm not stopping drinking. And she didn't for years. And I'll talk to her a little bit later about her. And so I would, they talked about a special program if you didn't think you're an alcoholic, and it was called a 90-day thing, 90 and 90 they called it. And I said, well, I can't stop drinking for 90 days, that's ridiculous, And they asked me if I could stay away from one drink for one day, And I thought to myself, what the hell, you think I'm an alcoholic? Anybody can stay away from one drink for one day, And they said there was enough power in the rooms of AA to keep me away from one drink for one day. And I said I'd give it a shot. Say goodbye to the baby. And I decided to go to one more meeting. I wasn't going to do any 90 stuff like that. So I went to an afternoon meeting the following day. I had to attend bar that night. And a guy who was at my meeting from the previous night grabbed a hold of me and he said, I met you last night. He said, could you do me a favor? And I said, sure, I can do you a favor. He says, do you have a car? And I said, of course I have a car. You think I'm an alcoholic? Of course I got a car. He said, there's a guy who just got fired from the Boulevard Watch Company in Queens, and they had asked him to stop drinking a whole bunch of times. He couldn't do it, what have you. And he's living on his daughter's couch. Could you take him home from this meeting? And I said, sure, I could do that, being a people pleaser and a bartender. And then tomorrow, bring him back to that same meeting, and that's 7 days a week. And I said, yeah, I could probably do that. I had no intentions of ever going back to another meeting. But I took this guy, Billy Tierney, I took him home, made arrangements to pick him up the next day to take him to one more meeting I'd go to. And I went to 10 Bar that night, had a good night. I didn't have to pick up the first drink. Then I picked up Billy Tierney and I took him to the meeting. And a strange thing happened at that second meeting I went to. I started seeing two guys that I could have swore were dead. Somebody would walk into the bar and said, "Hey, you ever see John the Butcher?" And I said, "I haven't seen him in a couple of years. Must be dead." I saw John the Butcher. I saw One-Eyed Mike. And these guys were psychos, not nice guys like me. And they were saying like they had a seat reserved for me. I said, "Seat reserved for me? You got to be kidding me." And that's what started happening. I started taking Billy Tierney to meetings every day, and I started seeing a lot of my old customers. And some of these guys were real psychos. And if I was 10 to bar one night, and one of these guys came in, my heart would start to palpitate. The hair I used to have stand on my head would go, so here comes trouble. 9 times out of 10, it was trouble. And here they weren't drinking. Physically, they looked the same, but there was something about their eyes, something had changed in them. I know what that is today. I know that's the experience that we have with the 12 steps. And that started me on a journey of going every day. And then the weeks started to turn into months. Still tend to bar in the same joint, but I wasn't drinking. My wife started being a little happier because I was showing up. I wasn't taking off on binge-a-rudies. My kids, I had 3 little boys at the time, toddlers, a little over toddlers, and they were happy because I started getting involved in their life. So things were starting to get a little bit better. Even the guy the owner of the bar that I was tending bar for was happy. For some reason, the receipts started going up a little bit. I was still stealing, but I was stealing a little less. That's the one thing, it's progress, not perfection. As I started going to the meetings, I would listen to other people, and they would hear, "Oh, what are you doing about the steps, Dave?" And then I would ask them, what are you supposed to do? He said, "For you, don't worry about it. Just don't drink and go to meetings." And that made sense. Why do this God stuff? I had a tough time with the God thing, or writing stuff down and paying people back. Why just don't drink and go to meetings. That's all. Worked good for me. But I also, if people would ask me, "Where are you in the steps?" I'd lie to them. That's why I lied to, And I'd say, "Oh, I did all 12 steps, do them twice on the weekends." And I did nothing. So I was a dry drunk, When do you take the steps? That was the confusing part, too. I would hear people say, "You take all first 3 steps as soon as you start throwing up." You take all 12 steps the first year. Then you take 1 step every year. And then 1 step every other year. And then I heard the guy I really liked, he said, "It's all BS, kid. You take 1 step every 5 years, and that's it." And that made sense to me. Be my sponsor. That was okay until I started doing the math. Got 12 steps, 5 years. That's 60 years. I was 33 years old. I'd be 93 by the time I had this spiritual awakening. So, again, I just didn't drink and I went to meetings and things started getting better. What happened to me happens to a lot of us. I hit the wall. Just as my first anniversary was coming up, I went into one of this life sucks, stop the world, I want to get off. See, I had taken a drunk and I had just tried the alcohol out. And that was okay in the beginning. But that's not AA. And I sat in the basement of my home with a loaded weapon saying life ain't worth living anymore. I had 3 little kids running around upstairs. I had my wife. I had the white picket fence and the 2 cars in the driveway and stuff like that. But I was just a dry drunk, And the thought came as I was sitting at my desk downstairs, call your sponsor. I had a sponsor who was my neighbor. And for that whole year, I never called him. I would see him at meetings, and he'd stop in the bar occasionally. Say, "How you doing, Dave?" "Oh, doing great. Thinking of suicide. This is working really good for me. So I thought, call Dick Kennedy, the sponsor. So I called Dick, and he listened to me for a couple of minutes. The oozing of self-pity, coming out of me, and He said, you've been doing Dave McDermott's program for the last year. Why don't you try AA's program? And it's in the book, Alcoholics Anonymous, and he hung up on me. So I went from this complete self-pity, life is terrible, to rage. How could he possibly do that? Isn't he supposed to come over and say, it's going to be okay, Dave? It's going to be okay, Dave? So what I did, what any normal person would do, I'd look for the number for the General Service Office in Manhattan, and there must be a bad sponsor hotline. And I was going to report him. He deserved it. The bottom line is that I couldn't find the number, and I followed the directions. And the directions are in the book Alcoholics Anonymous. And that's what I'm going to talk about for a little while. I suffer from dyslexia. I didn't realize that until after I was sober for a while. I switch around numbers and letters and things like that. And my comprehension wasn't too great. And somebody suggested, why don't you read the book to somebody else? And that's what I did. I had a friend of mine, he was sober about the same time, and I'd start reading the book line by line to him. And then 2 or 3 other people came over. And then 4 or 5 came over. And then we had a little bit of a group that we went through the directions in the book. And that later became a part of my home group as doing a big book study. But in the beginning, you look at the book was published in April of 1939. Amazing how many years ago that was. And there was only about 100 people sober. And in there was, they needed a doctor's opinion. They asked Dr. William Silkworth, who had detoxed Bill Wilson at Towns Hospital, if he'd write something for the page number 1 in the book. And he did, and that's a letter in the summer of 1938. And then when they came to the manuscript part of the book in the early part of 1939, they needed more in that letter, and then they went back to him. And then he gave us the second part, which is the main section of the doctor's opinion. Now, the doctor's opinion was, the book went through 16 printings for the first edition. And the doctor's opinion was always on page number 1 over all of those years. And in 1955, they come out with the second edition of the book. They kept the basic text the same, they added and deleted stories, and they took the doctor's opinion from page number 1 and they put it in the Roman numerals. And they didn't realize that alcoholics don't read Roman numerals. They don't read the freaking book to begin with. So that kind of took the bounce away from it. But in there, he described a couple of things that helped me right in the beginning, and it might help somebody here tonight. There are a couple of miracles that he talks about in here. One, he talks about 5 different classifications of alcoholics. I mean, just hit on that. He says the classifications of alcoholics is most difficult and in most scope outside the detail in his book. So he gives you a synopsis. Here's number 1. There are, of course, the psychopaths who are emotionally unstable. We are all familiar with this type. They're always going on the wagon for keeps. They are over-remorseful, make many resolutions, but never a decision. Any psychopaths here? I saw some out in the parking lot. They must have been the Boy Scouts, though. But always going on the wagon for keeps. Anybody here always on the wagon for keeps? How about coming off a drunk, over-remorseful? Many resolutions of never making a decision. I identified with that. Here's the second one. There's the type of man who is unwilling to admit that he can't take a drink. He plans various ways of drinking. He changes his brand or his environment. Anybody here change brands? You know, if I drink gin, I sin. I had to get off the hard stuff. You know, brown whiskeys was my problem. I had to go to straight vodka and nice and clear. You know, that didn't do it. Then I become a beer drinker, you know, and the beer just didn't do it. And I needed all the other stuff that went along with it. But it was always changing the brand. There was one part of when I was still tending the bar there, I figured Portuguese red wines. That was the answer to my drinking. and I became an expert on Portuguese red wines. I did. And I had to stop drinking it because when I was throwing up in the morning, I didn't know whether I was bleeding to death. These things never saw a grape. 89 cents a gallon. Yeah. Number 3, there's the type who always believes that after being entirely free from alcohol for a period of time, they can take a drink without danger. How many of us said, that's it, I'm off it, I'm off it, I'm off it. And then the subtle insanity that precedes the first drink, I'll just have one. I'll just have 10. And then you're off on a run. Then the 4th one is there is the manic depressive type, extreme highs to extreme lows. That was me, who was perhaps the least understood by his friends and about whom a whole chapter could be written. First time in history, 5 different classifications of alcoholics, never done before. Then he goes on, and I'll just last one with this, why we drink. Men and women drink essentially because they like the effect produced by alcohol. The sensation is so elusive, while they admit it is injurious, they cannot after a time differentiate the true from the false. To them, their alcoholic life seems the only normal one. I was a daily drinker. I drank every day. It was a rarity if I missed a day. I poured whiskey for a living. Alcohol was coming out of my pores. I could go to Publix today and smell somebody that had a cocktail on Sunday night, 2 aisles away. I'm so sensitive to the smell of alcohol. I stunk of alcohol. Oh, personally normal. And then he goes over to probably the most important part of the doctor's opinion and even the book. He tells us things to watch out for. He says they are restless, irritable, and discontented. Those are the warning signs. Those are the red flags to me. Unless they again experience the sense of ease and comfort that comes at once by taking a few drinks. Subtle insanity precedes the first drink. And they see others drinking with impunity. After they succumb to the desire again, as so many do, the phenomena of craving develops. First time in history. Once we put alcohol in the system, it lights the fire. They pass through a well-known stage of a spree. What would you call it today? A run, a mission, or whatever. Emerging remorseful. Anybody come off a drunk remorseful? Absolutely. With a firm resolution, what? Not doing this again. This is repeated over and over and over and over again. And that's what lit me up in this book. I come off a bad drunk. I tell my wife, just let me back in the house. I swear to God, I swear on the kids, I swear on the Bible, I'm not going to do this anymore. The next day, I'm restless, I'm irritable, I'm walking up and down the living room, I'm just shaking the keys, I'm saying, I got to get the hell out of here. And I see my neighbor, who got locked up for a DWI, and he's popping a couple of cold ones on the porch. I'm saying he can drink and I can't. And that's what he's saying. See other people drinking with impunity. Pick up the first drink triggers the allergy. Now I'm on a run, I'm on a tear, I'm full of guilt, full of remorse, full of shame, over and over again. And this is the most important part for me. Again, I'm only talking about me, my opinions, of the whole book. Silkworth, an expert on alcoholism, gives us the answer. Says, unless this person can experience an entire psychic change, there is very little hope of his recovery. So what Silkworth's telling me there is that if I just take a drunk, I dry the alcohol out, what am I left with? A dry drunk who's going to repeat it over and over and over again. And he says I need an entire psychic change. What does the word psychic mean? Well, if you look up in the dictionary, there's a couple of different definitions. One is a spiritual change. If Silkworth was writing our 12 steps, which he did not, our 12 step probably would have read having had an entire psychic change as a result of these 12 steps. But he didn't write it. So here he gave us the answer to alcoholism. And he says once that happens, on the other hand, and as strange as it must seem to those who do not understand, once a psychic change has occurred, once I experienced the 12 steps of this program, the very same person who seemed doomed who had so many problems he despaired of ever solving them, suddenly finds himself easily able to control his desire for alcohol. The only effect necessary being required to follow a few simple rules. He called them simple rules. We call them the 12 steps. This is buried in the beginning of the book now. Ever since 1955, this was their Roman numeral, which nobody reads. And those are the answers. When I started reading that, the program started to come alive to me. Bill's story, I had the opportunity of becoming a little bit of an amateur historian, getting involved in the history of AA, especially the New York AA. Of course, I was living only an hour and a half from Manhattan and from Brooklyn, where he did a lot of his drinking. And Bill's story, I could just hit over and over again. Then there's a couple of other parts. I'm not going to read you the whole book. Yeah, maybe I will. But each page on it. The other thing that I really had a problem with, a lot of us have a problem with, is the God thing. You know, and asks us on page 47, it says we need to ask ourselves but one short question. Do I now believe, or am I even willing to believe, that there's a power greater than myself? And then in that chapter, we agnostics, it asked us 7 different times to put aside our prejudice. You know, I was 33 years old when I got here, and I had a 10-year-old's conception of what a God was. I certainly didn't have an adult's conception of what a God was. And where that conception came was by hearing other men talk about their experience with it. And then reading this chapter, We Agnostics. And it talks over and over about so many things. And then the last thing I want to hit on here, this is called the bedevilments. And the bedevilments were more the first step for me, whether I belonged here or not. And here's what the bedevilments on page 52 is. We were having trouble with our personal relationships. Anyone here had trouble with personal relationships while we were drinking? Nope? Okay. We couldn't control our emotional natures. And that was me. I was into these crying jags. You know, you go into a bar to be cheered up by the bartender. You'd be in there 10 minutes, I'd be crying in your beer, how terrible life was. People were choosing to drink elsewhere. We were a prey to misery and depression. Any miserable drunks here? How about some depressing drunks? Front row over there. I couldn't make a living. We had a feeling of uselessness. We were full of fear. We were unhappy. We couldn't seem to be a help to other people. Was not the basic solution of these bedevilments more important than whether there was newsreels about God or whether I believed in God or didn't believe in God? One of the gifts of the book Alcoholics Anonymous, it never identified the higher power. When I got here, if you told me I had to believe in this God or I had to believe in that God, I'd be dead today. And what they said is you choose your own conception of God. And the book later on talks about we have the God within, or the spirit within, or the conscious within. Powerful, powerful stuff. So by taking other people through the book Alcoholics Anonymous, I started to heal. And that's how my spiritual growth started. I got involved in service in Alcoholics Anonymous real early. I didn't want to know any part of service, business meetings and stuff like that. And my sponsor, Dick Kennedy, said, why don't you go to this intergroup meeting with me? I said, Dick, I don't really like that. And he says, well, if you go to the meeting, we'll make you the chairperson. And that struck my ego. Here I am, sober 7 or 8 months, whatever it was, and they're going to realize my ability to take the troops through it. So I went with him, and we got there, and he said, there's the chairs over there. You stack them over there, and at the end of the meeting, you pick up all the chairs, and you put them back on the racks over there. So I was the chairperson. But what happened there, it started getting me going to those stupid intergroup meetings, which got me involved in service in different areas. And eventually, over the first bunch of years, Again, I was still tending bar for a living. Did that for the first 5 years. Got me into doing public information work, professional community work, really getting involved in the service of Alcoholics Anonymous. I finally got out of the bar business and I got into my own business, a little manufacturing business that I had. I hired a couple of people in the program for salesmen, and things are rolling along fine. Back into 1987, I guess it was, the economy turned, and things got bad. The business started going under. And I got a hold of my sponsor. I said, what am I going to do? He says, Dave, you got to turn it over to God. You have to turn it over to your higher power. And he says, you don't understand. People are knocking on my door. They want their money. Dave, he said, you got to turn it over to your higher power. So that's what I did. Is I turned all my financial problems over to my higher powers, God. And then not realizing God turned all my financial problems over to the federal bankruptcy court. So here I was, 11 years sober in 1988, standing in front of a federal bankruptcy judge, losing everything, And I was saying, is this what sobriety is all about? Going broke, And I found out I was a lousy businessman. Pretty simple like that. And that gave me, it swept away the part of the past, and I was able to walk out of that bankruptcy court with a weight of the shoulders, with weight of all that debt and all the problems, on my shoulders. But the problem was that I couldn't get a job. The market had turned on it, and there was we had a meeting in a school in out where I was in Lake Ronkonkoma, school for the deaf. The fellow who was the maintenance man was also in the program, and a good friend of mine. He says, "Why don't you come over and work with me until you find another job?" And that's what I did. Is I went from my executive position to cleaning toilets and vacuuming school classrooms for the deaf, and probably one of the nicest things that happened to me in my sobriety. And what it did is it just brought me down to where I was. And I eventually got back in. I got back into sales and became fairly successful as the years went on. But I stayed plugged into the rooms of AA, and that was the absolute key. I started getting into the history of AA deeper and deeper. I decided I was going to write a book about AA history. And I wound up meeting some dynamite people that were part of AA history. A couple of them in 1990, I interviewed Dr. Bob's daughter. Dr. Bob, as most of us know, is the co-founder, a woman by the name of Sue Windows. And she was quite the character. She was a little lady. And I was in a hotel lobby with her after a conference. And so I started asking her some questions. I'm talking back her and Dr. Bob. She was with Dr. Bob and Bill Wilson when they went to see Henrietta Seibling, where Dr. Bob first met. And they also, so I'm asking her some questions, and she says to me, "Do you know who AA number 4 was?" And I just sat back. I said, I don't know. And she started yelling at me, "Don't you read your own literature?" And she went on to tell me AA number 4 was a guy named Ernie Galbraith. And she started dating Ernie. And Dr. Bob and Ann were dead against her going out with Ernie. Ernie was, I think, about 12 or 13 years older than her. She was quite an attractive young lady. She had an argument with Dr. Bob and Ann, and then decided, I'm going to go marry this guy. And she did marry him, and Dr. Bob and Ann Smith didn't go to the wedding. She didn't invite her parents to the wedding. And Ernie got drunk at the wedding. That was AA number 4. And she was telling me, so I should have got rid of the bum that day. But she went on. I do a history presentation. I have pictures of her and Ernie and our kids and what have you. She married Ernie. She had 2 children, Mickey and a daughter who was a real tragedy in her life. The daughter was Dr. Bob's granddaughter, and she had an alcohol problem, she had a drug problem, and she had a little mental problem. She had a little daughter, Sandy, and Sandy was 6 years old, and the tragedy happened is that she murdered her daughter and then committed suicide. So that was Dr. Bob's granddaughter. So Smitty had 4 children. He eventually lived out in Texas. He wasn't an alcoholic. He stayed. He didn't. His wife joined AA, but he decided to join Al-Anon, and he stayed active. And I was able to interview him. And he had, again, a tragedy. 3 of his kids, the 2 girls were very successful, and one son committed suicide. So what I really found strange was that here's Dr. Bob's 2 grandchildren, both of them had demon problems and committed suicide. It's a terrible story, isn't it? I cheer everybody up yet? But over that time, that was in 1990, I met her a couple of other times, and she died in 2003, I believe it was, and Smitty died in 2006. My quest, I wound up with a couple of people that had sponsored Ebby Thatcher. So I always wonder what happened to Ebby Thatcher. He's the guy that carried the message to Bill Wilson. And the one fellow I met that got me started with it was a guy named Cersei Whaley. I was asked to speak at they started a meeting back in the early 50s for Bill Wilson. And it was a Friday morning meeting at 11 o'clock. And because Bill Wilson wasn't like you and I could just go to a meeting and share about the cat or whatever the hell's going on, of course he would be the center of the attention of the meeting. So they started this meeting. Anyway, years later, I guess it's 1989 or so, or 1990, I was asked to speak at that meeting. And the meeting still goes today. If you're ever in the World Service Office, it's still 11 o'clock on Fridays. People from around the world try to make that when they're in the country. And there was 2 people there. A guy who must have been 6'5", 6'6", with a suit on, really dressed, and his wife Margaret was there, and she was like in a gown. And I started talking to him, and I talked to him for about an hour after the meeting, and I found out he's the guy that got Ebby Thatcher sober in Texas, and he told me the whole story about that. So that was going to be the title of my book, was the Whatever Happened to Ebby. And that started me on a search of tracking Ebby Thatcher. This is the guy that carried the message to Bill Wilson. He wound up getting drunk 2.5 years after he carried the message. And then I traced them all through the 1940s into the 1950s when he went down with Cersei Whaley in 1953, where he worked in 1953. And he wound up falling in love with a woman who was a nurse, who Cersei Whaley had 2 clinics down there, and Cersei Whaley had fired her, and it was the love of his life. So he was back getting sober, going to meetings down there, and in 1961 she died of an overdose. She was also an addict, and the day she passed away, I wound up getting the death certificate, and Ebby started drinking that day again. So here he had almost 8 years of sobriety, the guy who carried the message to Bill Wilson in the 1950s and 60s, 50s rather. And then I traced him all the way up. Anyway, long story short, he wound up with emphysema. He Bill Wilson got him into a place called McPike's. Mickey and Margaret McPike ran it. A small little, you would call it a rest home today, up outside of Albany. And he was 2.5 years sober when he passed away. One of my history mentors was a woman by the name of Nell Wing. Nell Wing was Bill Wilson's secretary. She started our archives in Manhattan. What a great lady. But she had gone up with Bill Wilson a number of times to see Ebby. And I would be asking her about Ebby, what he looked like then, or what have you. But he was, with emphysema at that time, there was no portable oxygen, so you couldn't go very far to the main oxygen tank. And she would tell me that he was not a happy camper. If he could have gotten out to get a drink, she said he probably would have. But he was 2.5 years away from a drink when he started. So what happened to my book that I was writing? I found out I don't know how to write a book. I got books worth of notes and stuff like that, and I do other presentations on it. So that's a little bit of a history thing. How about get back to me for a minute? Dr. Bob. I'm just going to finish up. I got 10 minutes to doing this. Dr. Bob was our co-founder. His wife wound up with a heart attack and died in 1949. Dr. Bob wound up with colon cancer, and he died in November of 1950. At our first international convention, he gave his last talk. And this is really, really powerful, so I'm going to just finish up close with that. I'm not going to read the whole thing, it's just the last couple of paragraphs. Now, he's been sick, he's been in bed for months, and he goes up and he speaks to this group of hundreds and hundreds of alcoholics that are at that first international convention in Cleveland, Ohio. He says, but there are 2 or 3 things that flash into my mind on which I would be fitting to lay a little emphasis. One is the simplicity of our program, simplicity of AA. Let's not louse it up with Freudian complexes and things that are interesting to the scientific mind, but have very little to do with our actual AA work. Our 12 steps, when simmered down to the last, resolve themselves into the words love and service. We understand what love is, and we understand what service is. So let's bear those 2 things in mind. Let's also remember to guard that erring member, the tongue. And if we must use it, let's use it with kindness and consideration and tolerance. One more thing. One more thing. None of us would be here today if somebody had taken time to explain things to us, to give us a little pat on the back, to take us to a meeting or two, to have done numerous little kind and thoughtful acts on our behalf. So let's never get the degree of smug complacency so that we're not willing to extend or attempt to that help which has been so beneficial to us and to our less fortunate brothers. Thank you very much. And he died, this was in July, and he died in November. Bill Wilson was with him a short time before he passed away, and Dr. Bob was saying to him, people in Akron know I'm dying, and they wanted to have a big mausoleum for me. And he said, why don't you and I just get buried like normal folks? And if you look at Dr. Bob's grave in Akron, we have Founders Day each year. It was just last weekend. I've been up there once before. But it's just a grave marker. It has no mention of Alcoholics Anonymous, that he was the founder, just the dates that he and his wife were deceased. And the same as Bill Wilson. Bill Wilson is buried up in the town that he grew up in Vermont, and East Dorset, Vermont. And his grave is the same way. It's just his name and the dates on it and his military stuff that's on there. So in finishing up, I'm in love with Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm in love with the history of AA. I love talking about it. The sad part is that I'm getting old. I'm 81 years old now. My memory's starting to flake a little bit. My body's starting to fall apart. I didn't think it would happen until I was 90. But I love being at AA meetings. I was in an 8 o'clock morning meeting, and I was at a noontime meeting today, and I was supposed to go to a Galway men's meeting. I do that every Tuesdays and Fridays, and I fell asleep. So at least I made it through this without falling asleep. The last thing I want to talk about too, the last 5 minutes, we go through the ups and downs in AA. Sometimes we go through real difficult times, but we didn't have to pick up a drink. My first wife continued to drink all along. When we had a 30-year marriage, and we decided to separate, which we did. And long story short, she was hooked on pills. She got a doctor to operate on her that she didn't need to. They screwed up in the anesthesia. She wound up going into a coma, and 2 months she was in a coma. And I had to make the decision to take her off life support, which I did. Her side of the family was accusing me of murdering her. They were getting a lawyer, but I had the support of the people in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. We can get through absolutely anything. There's the gift of AA. It's just the power of what you find in this room and other rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. We got hit with 2 hurricanes. We had a house on Hudson Beach, which a couple of guys here helped a number of times with all the flooding and stuff. One was called Idalia, and that was the first one that hit where we got flooded. And my wife's first name was Idalia, so she got even with me from taking her off life support. My wildest dreams. So I'd like to thank the group for having me talk today, and I hope I didn't put too many people to sleep. Thanks.